In my distress, I cried to the Lord that he may answer me. Deliver, O Lord, from lying lips, from a deceitful tongue. It's a cry of desperation, isn't it? It sounds like a cry of desperation to me. But what is the cause of this distress? Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips and deceitful tongue. Lies and deceit are causing this desperation and cry for deliverance. Lies and deceit. Dishonesty and deception. Duplicity. Trickery. Sound familiar? We're going to find all these Psalms of Ascents amazingly contemporary. We live in a world, don't we, that is supposed to be so different than it is. It's a world, it seems, in which wisdom and prudence require that we view every institution as potentially corrupt. A world in which we can't assume the integrity of anyone we meet. A world in which we must always be aware of the need to protect ourselves against exploitation, physically, legally, financially, emotionally. It's a culture in which nearly everyone seeks to blame the other for what they think is wrong. What is true and real is confusing, uncertain. As pundits and the media present dozens of conflicting interpretive narratives to us. Bots and cookies track our every whim and click to offer us more and more of what marketers and manipulators believe we need and desire. Discerning self-help books, blogs appear every 10 minutes with the 6 steps of life filled with happiness and success. Con artists, I got a call the other day, phone us regularly to let us know that the IRS is about to take us to court, which they would happily help us avoid if we would just give them access to our bank account number. Deep down, we are deeply uncertain we'll ever hear or know what is truly going on in our world or with us ever again. True north seems to have migrated off the map with all the untruth and half-lies tweeted and emailed and spoken under oath. Now, most of us bury or attempt to manage all this distress. And slowly, sadly, perhaps out of necessity, we adapt. We learn to adjust. We seek the advice of friends before choosing a doctor or a mechanic, because we got questions. We buy a house in a nice, safe neighborhood, yet even so, we suffer from a constant feeling of not at homeness in this world. We purchase insurance to try to secure our future. We do everything we can to minimize the possibility of being victimized. Yet still, in the back of our minds, in our gut, in our souls, there is a tension. We know that things aren't supposed to be this way. don't we? It's as if the earth has been tilted an additional half degree on its axis, and the world is spinning in very unfamiliar ways. Something is broken. No matter how much we have learned to cope, something inside us cries out, something in our heart yearns for a place where these things would be different. Where all these misshapen and misshaping influences would cease. Something is broken. And we with it. And it causes us to sigh and groan and be distressed. There has got to be something more than the grind of a culture that daily diminishes. Advertisers that try to reduce us to nothing more than an economic unit. Hostile politics that feel like warfare. And all the lies that we have been told about ourselves and our neighbors and our world. And every week, we cry out with words that sound very much like our psalmist this morning. Words so familiar, however rote, we barely know what we are praying. Our Father, deliver us from evil. This is actually the beginning of our journey back to God. It begins in distress, pain, a deep dissatisfaction over our situation, the predicament in which we sense that we are trapped. So often it is the first steps that turn us back toward God, and they start with disappointment in the way things are. And the biggest lie of all is that life as we see and experience it is as it should be, the way it always will be, the way our Maker intended it to be. There is something more, but you can't expect to find that something more by sitting still. It's a journey. For the writer of Psalm 120, that journey begins, in my distress, I cry out to the Lord that he may answer me. Deliver me, O Lord, from lying lips and a deceitful tongue. He's not talking about his own personal tendencies to lie or to deceive. He's talking about the lies and the deceit that surround him, that assault him, that weary him, that work to erode the truth that he is one of God's own, that at bedrock he is more than a pawn of history, more than an inert speck in the universe, but rather a person of meaning and purpose with a heart and soul valued and loved by God, who has something more for the human race than an endless cycle of violence and deception and manipulation. Sometimes I think that we Christians don't want to admit what God's Word regularly reminds us of, that we live in a world in rebellion against God. Ouch. when things are not the way they're supposed to be, we too should lament and cry out. We should lament when lying is completely acceptable. We too should lament when strife and conflict become okay, the order of the day, when murder is okay. There is no hint in this psalm that God is sovereign and this is just the way that it is. As the people of God, we long for a world set right, don't we? We long for a world that is truthful, that honors and pursues what is good. We long for a world where there is no more cancer, but we also long for a world where children are no longer put in cages. We know that this other kind of world is the kind of world God intended. And the more we long for that world, the more discontent we will be with this one. The more we will want to join with God in resetting things rightly. Beginning with ourselves. So, what does the psalmist do here? As he heads out on his journey, he's reminded in his distress, in his discontent, to pray. To reach out to God, to pray with confidence for deliverance. To pray against that which is wicked and evil in the world, and for God's justice and peace. And in the midst of that prayer, who knows how long he prayed that? Who knows how long that prayer was? But in the midst of that prayer, he undergoes what you could call a subtle but profound conversion of sorts, transformation, change. Sometimes we're convinced that humans cannot really change. But that's really just a part of the lie we are told. You can change. God can change you. Prayer can change you. So the writer of the psalm bemoans the fact that he dwells in this hostile environment, that he lives in Mesech and Kedar. And just so you know, Mesech and Kedar were powerful, warlike peoples located to the north and the south of Palestine. They were characterized by a ruthlessness. They took pride in their military strength, their economic power. They had no qualms about attacking and devouring weaker nations. Not only did they not desire and seek peace, they actually hated it. They loved conflict and destruction and the brutal exercise of power. Now, of course, no one could live physically in these two places simultaneously. The psalmist here is writing metaphorically, saying the place and culture where I do live feels like living in Mesech and Kedar. Does that sound just a little bit like our own world? He calls for justice. What should be done about this? And as obscure as the images are that he uses, warriors with sharp arrows, glowing coals of the broom tree, you read them and you can't help but sense they're pretty harsh. They seem to point to his own sense of justice and maybe not God's. It seems just as violent and as hurtful as all the lies and deceit that he has suffered. But here's where his transformation, his change, his conversion takes place. Rather than seeking revenge, rather than choosing to fight fire with fire, to operate with an eye for an eye kind of response in his distress, what does he conclude? How does he finally choose to act? How is his prayer for deliverance answered? In verse 6, too long have I had my dwelling among those who hate peace. In other words, I have been living in this culture of lies and deceit so long, why it's begun to mold and shape me to be someone who I am not. I'm now acting the lie and living the deception as badly as those around me. I feel not only the inner conflict and pain and distress this culture of lies and deception causes me and others, but I'm beginning to see also the corrosive and undermining effects it's having on my own person, making me less than I was called to be as one who belongs to God and is to live in this world as a child of God with the people of God. Woe is me! No longer. I will choose to act and behave as I was made to act and behave. One who seeks and lives for peace, shalom. Even though those with whom I live are choosing to continue to buy into the lies and deceit that lead to conflict and hate and violence among people. I will live shalom, God's peace, a peace expressed as reconciliation and wholeness, goodness, sufficiency, love, loyalty, making and putting things right. No more angry words or thoughts of revenge from me or wallowing about in just how bad things are getting. I'll leave that matter up to God. My life will positively reflect the goodness and the heart of God who made me in his image, no matter what the surrounding culture looks and acts like. It all sounds a bit like the Apostle Paul's call to live in the world, but not of the world, doesn't it? Not conformed to the world's standards, but conformed to the image in which God made us, refusing to simply go along to get along with the world around us. Rather choosing and setting our course on living out of the deepest reality of a kingdom someone named Jesus came teaching and demonstrating. Well, this is the note, the tune, if you will, of the very first song of ascent. It asks us to survey the landscape around us and ask ourselves, what kind of person do I want to be? You and I may not have a choice about the world and the culture that we live in, but what kind of world do you want to live for? A world of easy falsehood and deception? that constantly wars against others and wears out your better self? Or a world of shalom, a world that values respect, works for reconciliation, builds people up rather than putting them down, finds its source in the God of peace. We're all, every last one of us, pilgrims on a journey full of choices. This Lent we will sing and reflect on songs for the journey. And God willing, we will find grace and strength in them to be changed ourselves. As the choir sung in the introit this morning, and in the sere and barren air, discern the passion under all. God's voice. Return. I love you still. Thanks be to God for his incredible gift to us in the Word made flesh and in the Word written as we find it in these Psalms of Ascent. Amen. Let us continue in response to God's grace, God's goodness, God's call to us to live out that kingdom that Christ came proclaiming as we offer ourselves through our gifts and our tithes.